much of what we have talked about, or what we have listened to rather, um, has approached the subject from the perspective of big ideas, because there's a growing understanding that we may not be able to change things. It may not be appropriate to change things incrementally. We may not get there if we take off little pieces of the puzzle and try and figure out how to fix little pieces. That the only way perhaps we get anywhere is if we, in a sense, re-engineer from the bottom up and the whole kind of system. So it is appropriate that we look at this from the perspective of challenging big ideas, the very kind of the very foundations of where we have come from in the last couple of hundred years. I guess if I could start almost from a different register, which is to say there'll be a lot of people watching this and being inspired by the ideas that you're presenting. And with anything, whether it's coming to a forum or watching a cooking show or a kind of a DIY homemaker show, there's a sense in which we want to come away and we almost immediately want to do something. We want to apply ourselves. We want to feel this agency running through our blood. And so maybe a starting point would be to ask of each of you, in a sense, what are the kind of, how do we conceive of the idea of first steps that someone might be approaching this question around entirely reconsidering our relationship to land, our relationship to what it means to be productive, what it means to engage with other cultures. It's in some ways, it's almost such a big thing. You can see some people being almost paralyzed by what's the first step here. So maybe if I could just go around the room and since we've just left Bruce, maybe I'll just put that to you first, Bruce, and then I'll go around the room after that. If I could put that to you, that sense of like, what's my first step? How do you conceive of that in sense of translating a big idea into the doing that follows?
Well, I would hope that people would know the history of this country, the real history of the country, and then explore the real philosophy of the country, so that we become aware that there is a way of living on the earth that is sustainable. But if you wanted something really easy to do, this afternoon I'm going to go down to the river and I'm going to pick salad vegetables to sell to restaurants in the district around here between Bega and Mallacoota. This salad vegetable grows in salt water. It grows on dry land. It grows in fresh water. And it is one of the most delicious salad vegetables. I fed it to Ben Shuri, a Kiwi, but a great Australian chef. And he was astounded that he had never, ever seen this plant or tasted it. And I don't do anything to this plant except I try to encourage the deer not to eat it. We've got feral deer on the property. I've removed the cattle, and since the cattle have been removed, this vegetable has flourished. All Australians could be growing this salad vegetable, kunjimwinyu we call it, salt sun. And it's delicious. And it does not make any demand on the earth at all. It gives back. And this is what the old people knew, that you can have food and you can be sustainable and you can improve soil all in the one hit. That this is what Mother Earth wants to do. This is her plant. She's given it to you. You can use it. It's not to say that Aboriginal people were just wandering by and picking it. There was management involved, and that management came from our philosophy. But I would say, if you wanted to do one thing, grow kunjim winu, grow warrigal greens, grow these vegetables that need no chemicals at all. You put chemicals on them, they're going to die. They need no extra water. Some of them can grow in salt water. This is a great thing to do for the earth and for yourself, because the nutritional values of these plants is enormous.
It's a really good starting point, because I guess you could say that the reverse of that, which is the understanding that in order to lay claim to land, that you first make it more productive, and therefore you almost incrementally, the more productive you make the land, the more you claim it. And so in a sense, what you're kind of saying there is that there's a kind of a relationship there, and there's a kind of a symbiosis. I like the phrase that Timothy used earlier, a kind of a symbiotic relationship that we have. Timothy, could I ask, in a sense, the same question of you? It's an interesting thing to note that, as you said yourself, the idea of using the word philosopher, is something that's been put to you rather necessary than you have taken a grab of. But certainly one of the qualities of a philosophy is that it has this fundamental way of informing ideas and how we are. But then there's always this question of how do you actually, is there such a thing as applied philosophy? And so for you, in a sense, because this is such an urgent subject we are talking about, how might we conceive of this idea of an applied philosophy in your sense?
Gosh, thank you so much for asking. And I'm so deeply honored to be in the company of Bruce and Sarah. And the first thing I wanted to say is actually watch Bruce and Sarah again. That's the priority number one. I think all of us were saying that we've got this, right? Like in all of our different ways, we were all saying, we already know what this is. There are all kinds of wisdom traditions that are actually in us, we can rely on. And we've got this. We know what this is. We know what to do, actually, even at all kinds of levels and scales. But, so part of it is in the spirit of thinking, well, the question, what can I do, should be in the key of, I know I've got this, right? And I think one thing I'd like to emphasize actually would be just get involved in as many different groups at as many different scales as possible, right? Like I was talking about my friend Calibri, who's a Puerto Rican activist, and she's all about neighborhoods, Neighborhoods are decimated in the USA. Everyone's so lonely, and totalitarianism happens when people are feeling lonely. I'm a big subscriber to Hannah Arendt's theory of the origin of totalitarianism then. People feeling isolated and lonely. I'm actually about to start a local newspaper. I'm going to go around to everybody's door in my street and just put a little note on their door and say, look, just email me with one really nice thing that happened today or this week, and it can be really low level, like a cat smiled at me kind of level, or I smiled at a cat, right? And I'm going to put this together and I'm going to publish it. And then maybe, gradually we extend the local news to the blog, and then to the sort of slightly wider neighborhood. How you resist fascism, is about a little bit remembering that you belong somewhere to other people and other entities, not just human beings. And you already do. You see, I wrote this book called Being Ecological, and what it really meant was you don't have to be ecological because you are, right? Like a lot of the time we ask this question, what can we do in the key of religion in a not good way, right? Like I'm a bad person, I have to totally redo my life, right? But actually, maybe what if there was actually, it was easier than you think? What if it was less violent than you didn't have to make such a violent transition as you thought, right? So another thing to do is to pay attention to how you ask yourself that question. What this funny word phenomenology means really is the how is the what, right? Like how something happens tells you what it is, right? Like Salt is a thing that dissolves in water. That's the how of salt, right? That sort of tells you about what it is. How you believe tells you a lot, right? Like some people think believe means hold on really, really tightly, you know, and then some people think believe means trusting, you know, I'm in that group, right? So pay attention to how you talk to yourself about what to do and get involved in as many different groups, just all different types of groups and many different scales as you possibly can. And these groups should not just include human beings.
Mm. I love this idea that the how is the what, and then further applying that to yourself. That what you are is how you are. Sarah, I wanted to ask you, as someone working in the world of architecture and buildings and cities, very much on a day-to-day basis, encountering the realities of ways of doing things that are other than what we're talking about today. And again, maybe from the same perspective, if we kind of to some extent understand the systems of building a city and controlling a city and planning a city and financing a city, et cetera, being these enormous institutions. From your perspective, what are there will be people watching the show who are equally involved in a professional capacity in some way or other. And so maybe the same question around this is such a huge shift, perhaps a paradigm shift in how we approach what we do. What for you, from your perspective, what are the first steps people can take that are achievable for them?
I think similar to what's been said before, you actually have to know who you are in relationship with the place that you live in and the laws and values of that country. And if you don't know who you are, then you can't remove your own bias and remove your own learned behaviors and thought processes that contribute to you effectively potentially having ignorance as to why you can't hear or understand something that somebody else is saying. So you have to work on yourself fundamentally. But I think in terms of actions, and you know, I'll probably keep saying these things over and over again, and I've probably said them a lot of times before, but we have to look at all of the professions that make up every step along the way that creates a building, from procurement to developers to quantity surveyors to surveyors in general to engineers to architects to all the sub-consultants to planning critically, to post-occupancy evaluations to builders, to everyone. Everyone has a part to play and everyone has a different power to change something along that chain of events. And if not everyone's on board, then the values of a project or the values of country get lost in that way. So I would say to developers or to governments or to clients, actually sit down and have a conversation with the traditional custodians of the land that you're working on and understand what that law and value is and embed that in the brief for what projects need to happen on that country and ensure that that's understood and carried through. If there's no values in the brief, then we bring our own values as individuals, and maybe perhaps that's sometimes why architects are selected over another architect, because we have a set of values that align with what the developer's looking for because they can't articulate it themselves. But I think fundamentally at the beginning, the very conception of a project, those values need to be there because they just drive our design objectives, they drive the design process, they drive the design outcome. But equally, you need to look at the other end of the spectrum or the mid end of the spectrum, like at planners and planning, for example. Local government areas and councils have a myriad of sort of legislations and requirements that we have to conform to and effectively define the documents that we need to create in some way in order to get a building approved or get it across the line. But imagine if, for example, we do in Victoria, we have Melbourne Water as a referral body. Imagine, and as part of that means that you have to engage with Melbourne Water, you have to conform to the requirements that they set out and the parameters that they set out when you're working near a river. And imagine if the traditional custodians were the referral body and you sort of go from the beginning, but also to this planning stage where the decisions are made and what's valued is actually upheld and continued through to actually getting a building approved. If you hit those 2 points, you're going to create faster change than you ever did just relying on an architect or just relying on one of those sort of sub-consultants or design consultants in the middle, because it's a carrot and the stick, right? So, I think if you're a planner or if you're a client or person that procures buildings, then actually go and have a genuine conversation about how the values and laws of country can be embedded into the requirements that we have. We've taken the first step in architecture and changing the way that we define an architect and what it means to be a responsible architect practicing on country. But that needs to happen critically at those 2 points in order for these projects to really succeed and to really be embedded. So I know that's specifically calling out 2 parts of our profession, but it's a responsibility that we all have. And like I said in my talk, we're welcomed onto country at these events. I would suggest go back and listen to Annie Caroline's Welcome and listen to the laws and values, understand them, take the time. It might take you years, like it took me years to truly understand what the story about time, flowing through me rather than me flowing through time. Take that time, because the other problem that we have, especially in architecture and especially tied to government cycles, is the crisis mentality. And I know we are in a crisis for our environment, but the crisis mentality that's applied to government housing in remote communities, for example, is atrocious. There's funding cycles tied to political periods. Delivery of housing has to be made. It's a short time frame. And so the crisis sort of mitigates this requirement or this human ethical responsibility to engage with people in these communities and ask them actually what do they want and what they need. And then you result in the same housing that's been built in these communities for years and years and years and years, and it's not healthy. It's not culturally sustainable. It's not even designed in response to the needs of communities and the family makeups. It's based on a Canadian system of occupancy, which has nothing to do with Aboriginal family units in remote communities or even in urban or rural communities. So, sorry, there's a lot of things in there, but I think we just need to make sure that we don't run too fast into the crisis, because if we do, then we'll end up just repeating mistakes that we've made.
Interesting. Timothy, you mentioned that on the back of what Sarah was talking there about the wider network in which decisions are made about the street, about buildings, about where we live, etc., and all of the different layers, etc. You talked briefly about this bizarre thing called the lawn, the front lawn, and all that it symbolizes. And I know that you mentioned in the past that when you first encountered it, it was like this moment of realizing that here is something that really symbolizes an awful lot, and that in a way you are in your own life kind of trying to build up a little bit of resistance to that idea of the front lawn. Just as an example, is that something that you see yourself does that take you into the realms of, let's just say, the neighborly code, and then from the neighborly code to the planning code, and from the planning code to some other system? Or is it something that you just directly, individually, I'm just going to take this on myself?
You wouldn't believe the trouble that I've been getting into in my neighborhood, trying to get leaf blowers and motorized lawnmowers banned. In fact, in the 18th century in Britain, there was the Association for the Abolition of Slavery, and I'm starting the Association for the Abolition of the American Lawn. The American lawn uses over a third of America's water. And, it's basically a void space. Talking of terra nullius, it's a kind of a symbol in a very hardcore sense, because you've actually destroyed a lot of life forms, and there's rules or laws that can allow you to shoot dead people who set foot on your lawn, thus weaponizing the whole notion of, don't tread on the grass. These devices, such as leaf blowers, don't have catalytic converters, right? So, it's up to you. But drive 100 miles in your car or use your lawnmower for 20 minutes. Yeah, it's the same amount of carbon emissions. In poor America, we are kept in the dark about stuff. That's how ideology is enforced over here. And, we were handed a whole bunch of broken European things to deal with, like white people, slavery, columns. What's a column? I don't even know what it is. I got columns on my building. I shouldn't, what even is that? Lawns, I've got to have this kind of Blenheim Palace thing in front of my house. and we just like make things out of broken stuff in the USA, you know, and we don't really know what lawns are. We don't really know what they're for. We should just kind of get rid of them. They are in fact majorly destroying Earth, and so they're like a symbol in a very hard sense of that word, not just in the sense of being a sign of something, but they actually are that. They sort of are that something. I'm actually writing a book right now because I got so fed up with it. It's called Welcome to the Astrodome, and the byline is Tim Morton was trying to get leaf blowers banned in his street. There was only one problem: he had to become a prominent environmental philosopher in order to have a shot at doing it.
That's wonderful. I think we all wish you great luck in that banning. Bruce, I wonder, could I ask you a little bit more about the farm? There's obviously a project you're working on connected to Black Duck Foods, and this idea of re-engaging with a different approach to making food and enjoying food. As we know, in a kind of today's world, anyone involved in farming or making food then also has to be involved somehow or other in a whole bunch of other logistical things, like how to move it around, how to get it from here to there, and how to, you know, enter into, you might call it, the product cycle. We also know that there's been a rather despicable tradition recently of the kind of the ugly food section of the supermarket, because food has now become so precisely identical that you either are an apple or you're something called an ugly fruit. And so there's a whole other system and structure of how we understand the thing that we put in our mouths. And I wonder for you, you described rather beautifully the walking down and collecting the food and then bringing it to be served to some people. Thinking about this idea of scale, because we talked about scale quite a bit, and scale and time, from the 10 to 100 to 1,000. For you, have you been thinking about the idea of scale in terms of food as well? That is to say, is it important to you that what you're doing is scalable? And if it is important, how does that then bump up against, let's say, existing regimes of food management that may be designed for another kind of way of understanding food?
Yeah, look, what we're doing is a political act. We're not just growing food, it's a political act because of all, you know what fashion is like. It's the most despicable thing on earth. But what food fashion is even worse. And right at the moment, it's fashionable to eat Australian Indigenous foods. The flash restaurants will have it. But of all the money made out of Australian Aboriginal foods, 1% of it goes to Aboriginal people. And that is a reflection of the Australian political and social system. And so what we're trying to do with the farm is to say to people, this is our food. You can't take it away from us without paying for it. You can't eat our food if you can't swallow our history. And we're very conscious that what we're doing is political, but we're also conscious that it's cultural and environmental. So I can't separate those things from the growing of the food. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to introduce this food to our own community, our own Aboriginal community first, and then to the other restaurants and broader community in this region. And we do a lot of work on regionality in this country, talking about regional foods and not transporting them over mega distances, but supplying food for the local market. And we used to do that in Australia. We used to do it in the world. But the supermarket chains and the industrial agriculture has changed all that. So in an Australian supermarket, for instance, you can get 3 or 4 different kind of apples. You can get one sort of cauliflower one sort of cabbage, one sort of watermelon, because that's efficient for the supermarket to handle it like that. And they can grow it in an industrial way or get other people to grow it in an industrial way. And so the food miles are enormous because they have to be transported from the same place to every point on the Australian continent. So that environmentally unsustainable. What we used to do in this country is we have our own dairy that made cheese and provided milk. We'd have our own baker. We'd have our own greengrocer. We'd have our own butcher. We don't do that anymore. It all gets brought to us in a truck, and the farmer is driven into the ground by the supermarket chain, and the food is old. You know, one of the companies here call themselves the fresh food people, but the food is relatively old, and it's kept alive by chemicals and made to look green with chemicals and made to last on the shelf by changing its genome. So the broccoli you buy is, it could be a fortnight old, but it doesn't die because it is, its genome has been changed. But to eat fresh, to truly eat fresh, is very important, and it sustains the neighbourhood. Like Timothy was saying, that if you know where your food is coming from and you know the person who's grown it, it creates an enormous sense of community, and it's better for the earth because we're not engaging in these major industrial acts on the land, which are designed to make a uniform product for everybody, instead of treating the land like herself, and so that the food that she grows best is what is served to the community. So you only get cherries in December in Australia. You only get watermelon in summer. You only get the apples in autumn. This is what it used to be like when I was a kid. You only get the bread that the baker bakes, but it is a day old. One of the bakers here was telling a story that he kept a loaf of industrial bread, which had been partly baked in Ireland and then brought to Australia. And he said the packaging on the bread died before the bread did because it was so full. The bread was so full of preservative, you couldn't kill it. And, you know, we get lulled into this idea that we can buy a loaf of bread and eat it right through the week. A loaf of fresh bread lasts 2 days, 3 days, but it's not loaded with preservatives. We wonder about disease in our communities. We wonder about psychological diseases, depressions, bipolar disorders. And many doctors are saying we are exposed to chemicals, really destructive chemicals in our daily life. This is going to have an effect on us. We wash our hair with formaldehyde. You know, we can't keep doing this and expect to stay well. So I'm arguing that for a regional food industry, not an industrial, multinational, stale food empire.
Interesting. So in a sense, it does beg many questions beyond the production of food. It begs the question of how it gets shared, where it travels to, where it's located, where the production is actually located. I wonder one follow-on question quickly to that, Bruce, is that we have, as a consequence of what we've done in the last few hundred years, concentrated people in very small areas. How are we able to apply the knowledge you're talking about in terms of production of food and the proximity of food to people, which we all know when everyone can understand that idea that when you get a tomato from someone's garden, or you bought something from the person who's actually made the bread, it feels different, it is different. There is a challenge though with where we're at with a city of 4 million people or 8 million people or 2 million people as to how that can work alongside. How do you feel we can somehow bridge that, maybe some of that gap, so that we can actually allow that connection between food production and food consumption to happen, even potentially in dense urban areas?
Well, COVID is forcing it on us in Australia at the moment, because people have realised they can work away from their office, they can work from home. So you can't buy land in regional Australia at the moment, particularly on the coast, because everyone in the city wants to work from their home beside the river or the sea. And so a lot of city people are racing down to the country, and they're bringing their city tastes with them. They want their coffee to be of a certain kind. They want their bread to be of a certain kind. And so small country towns that didn't have a baker have suddenly got a baker. Small country towns that never had cuts of meat that the city folk want suddenly got a butcher again. You know, I've seen the transformation. I saw the decline where butcher shops and bakers closed in country towns so that Coles could serve people indestructible bread. But now I'm seeing a little bit of the reverse, and it's the people are talking. You know, we the people have enormous power. We just have to stop sitting and begging when we're told to sit and beg. And, you know, we can change things. And it's been a remarkable change in Australia since COVID. I think we can do it. But, you know, from an Aboriginal point of view, I'm begging Australia, you know, don't just eat groovy food and expect not to have to be responsible for it. You know, you are responsible for what you eat and where it comes from. And this is what we're doing on the farm. We want people to say, we acknowledge that this plant has been domesticated by you people. You know, it grows, you could say, wild, but we know that repeated harvests of that have domesticated that plant to the human action. So it's an Aboriginal food. And we just want Australians to do that. And I think it's happening. I think there's an enormous amount of goodwill in the world, but it is being subjugated by big business. And I'm like I said before, I'm not anti-capitalist. I'm not anti-democracy, not at all. I think democracy, wonderful tool. Aboriginal people invented it. But I think we need to be honest about. Sorry, my dog just fell off the couch. Yeah, I believe in regionality, and I believe that the change is coming. And I don't think the industrial right are aware that it's happening as much as it is. They resent it. They know they hate it. I don't think they understand how powerful it is, because a thing like COVID suddenly makes it real. You know, a little disease, you know, I'm sorry to call it a little disease, but a small medical problem like that causes enormous change. And I'm excited by what we the people might do.
I agree. I think you're quite right. There is a change, and it's manifest in many ways. I'm a note, for instance, the wonderful installation greenhouse in the city of Melbourne by Jos Bakker, which talks about the production of food and about the eating of the food and understanding more about where this food comes from and its repercussions beyond us into the environment. Sarah, I wanted to ask you, we haven't got too much time left, but we do have time for a few more questions. But one, I guess probably a fairly big question in the context of time, and I apologize that it's a bit of a big question, is our cities that we live in have accrued over many generations. and the one that you and I both live in, for the buildings that have accrued, we're kind of stuck with for a while. And a lot of those buildings absolutely manifest all of the values and all of the traditions and all of the thinking of colonial era Australia. As Timothy mentioned, he's surrounded in columns. He's got things around him like that are just accrued around him that America has taken also from England, and we have too. On the basis that for many other good reasons, not least of which material sustainability, we can't knock them all down, and nor perhaps should we. So I guess one thing to ask is, in rethinking our relationship to the city, how do we live with the legacy of things that express such different views, and even views that might seem repugnant to us now? How do we continue to live with them? What should our approach be to the legacy of the last 200 years of building?
It's a great question, and I think there's probably multiple answers. And I don't think that we should tear them down, because that would be incredibly wasteful. What we're better off doing is working with them and creating different ways to remap our identities, or the identity of place, onto them when they need restoration. But otherwise, do you remember, is it Louis Kahn? I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but Louis Kahn made that famous quote, "What does the brick want to be?"
Yes, that's right.
And it's this kind of position of object. A brick is a form, it's a certain dimension, all these things. But when I look at the bricks, and particularly the bricks that make up Melbourne, or the stones, or bluestone, sandstone, all of these different things and materials that make up these buildings, even if they are colonial buildings, they came mostly from here. From Australia. They're someone's country. They represent someone. So even if they've been sort of collected in this colonial form that we recognize, they're still part of country. And traditional owners might have some will sort of believe that their creative spirits are tied to certain stones. And so seeing those stones as a reflection of themselves, yes, the building, the form, not ideal, but those materials are there, and we're surrounded by country all of the time. You stand in the middle of the city and you look around you and you go, well, whose country is actually, am I standing on? What is the asphalt made from? Where did the sand come from that sits underneath that? We've got bluestone pavers. This is not Victorian volcanic plain country, so that has to have come from the west. The buildings themselves, clay might be from the goldfields or from Storwell. So we've got different people's countries all around us, and I think we need to honour those by not tearing them down, and actually telling the stories of where those buildings come from and whose countries we're living within, even though we're obviously on a traditional owner's country. But all of these materials in some way are ambassadors of the countries that they've come from. So we need to honour them, and we need to respect them. And no, we don't need to tear them all down. But I think we just need to reframe these things. We live with the legacy of the decisions that we've made in the past, and it's a bit like the conversation of, do you tear down a statue or do you not? For some people, it's important to have that statue there because it starts a conversation about how the history has been whitewashed or written from a certain perspective, and the opportunity in that case is to create a counter monument or counter something to ensure that conversation is there. But the same thing could apply for our buildings. They're evidence of the decisions that we've made in the past that we have to live with and take responsibility for. But it means that we can shift now, and the next wave of buildings that we create, because we're going to keep creating buildings, we have to. That's the paradox of working in architecture. We're still going to keep doing it. So why don't we be responsible and make them represent country, make them live the values, consider them as living entities, and take that responsibility. And I think fundamentally we all need to sort of delete the word hope from our vocabulary. I'm sure it works in some circumstances, but hope stops you from taking responsibility. It's like, I hope you have a nice day, Andrew, but I'm not going to actually do anything about you having a nice day. I could, but I choose not to. I'm just hope that you do. And so, you hope that the future is more sustainable. Well, no, what power do you have to make it more sustainable? You hope that the systems that deliver food will become more manageable and better for country or better for the environment. But also, you make a decision every time you buy something from the supermarket or buy something from a local grocer. You put your money where your mouth is and your values where your credit card goes. Like we just have to get off the couch and stop hoping and actually do something, even if it's tiny.
Best hope, more action. Very good. Timothy, I could possibly kind of, in a way, rephrase that question to you insofar as you made a very powerful case that for philosophy being less about ideas, the whose idea, the big idea, and more about connecting to emotions, the emotion of knowledge. And yet we probably are all coming off the back of centuries of the first. We're coming off the back of centuries of like logocentric approach to what is a word, what does it mean, what is it, what is the language we're speaking, and what is your idea. And so I guess for you, how do you kind of, what is your relationship to what has immediately passed, or even which is continuing, but that tradition in philosophy and in thinking, how do you relate to that? Is it a disruption? Is it a repudiation of? Is it a transformation of? How do you relate to that kind of that tradition? I was going to say that great Western tradition, but let's just call it that tradition within philosophy.
Oh, sure. Well, I like this word deconstruction, actually. People mistakenly think that it means destroy, or sometimes they think it means break apart into smaller bits that you can analyze, but we've got words for that. It's break apart into smaller bits so that you can analyze them or destroy them. That's not what deconstruction actually is. Deconstruction is that, I prefer a little bit of translation by a scholar called Joan Stambor of this word, which was invented in German, actually. She says destructuring, I sort of like that, destructuring, right? So let's take the example of a statue, since Sarah mentioned it, right? There are ways of destructuring that statue. You can put it in a museum so people don't have to be oppressed by it, right? Like in a way, architecture and statues are like other people's art that you have to endure anyway, because they're kind of there and you're in social space. So at least might give people the choice to engage with it or not, right? In Bristol, I think recently in Bristol in the UK, they took the statue of the slave owner and they put it on its side in a different location in a museum. That's kind of destructuring it, right? It's sort of different from destroying. And it's sort of like you've always got what you've got, right? I mean, I've got this. I have this right now. It's this strange body, and I have asthma, and I have sleep apnea, and I have this non-binary gender, and I have this funny hairdo, and this is what I've got to work with, right? And I have various ways to work with it, and that doesn't mean that the future can't be different, right? Like that's how you find the future. You're always going to be looking for the future in the past. In a funny way, is the idea of present is often kind of turned into a kind of reified plastic version of what it really could be, and like if you look at all of this, it's just like a story about what happened to, like, I decided to put this shirt on and I did my hair like this, and all this stuff is like a story that's called the past, right? But that doesn't mean like we know exactly who the hell is this Tim Morton person, right? That's the future. It's like when you look at a poem, you're looking at all these decisions that were made by all different kinds of entities, actually, to put a little bit of a rhyme there and put an image there or whatever. That's the past. But what is this poem? What does it mean? Right? That's the future. And so the future is available always. You can find it in the past. You can find the future in the past. And I think that's a theme we've all been talking about. I love this idea of past, present, and future kind of collision that Sarah was talking about. It's sort of right on. And this idea that time is a thing that flows from beings rather than being a thing that we're kind of moving in like a little dot on a Wikipedia line, right? The future is always available. And by future, I mean a genuinely future, like the possibility that things can be different. And we really need some of that right now, especially so-called Generation Z, as they say over here. I feel like a lot of my job is trying to help Generation Z feel like not wanting to die, because when they say previous generations messed us up, they mean thousands and thousands of years of previous generations messed us up. the oppression of that, the weight of that that's weighing on them, you know, and looking at a very bleak possible future, right? So we have to sort of figure out ways of finding a kind of more refreshing quality. And we're only going to find it in one place, and that's somewhere in the past, right? Maybe it's under the sofa next to me. I don't want to look right now.
Thank you. I'd like to give the last word to Bruce. We're almost out of time, but I would like to reflect on one last thing, Bruce. You mentioned that you don't have to ask the question about climate change with young people; they know it, and in a sense, we are looking forward to a future where they are going to have to live in, and they're going to have to do something with. I'm interested in the farm and the plans you have. To some extent, they will depend on future generations to build on and to grow. There has been a tradition for many years, almost generations, of young people leaving rural land, leaving the farm. There's been a classic of the 20th century. Do you think that this new approach to how we conceive of food, making food, growing food, harvesting food, celebrating food, is it too much to be optimistic that it could open a window for a return to land in future generations?
I don't think so. You know, you could see what it happened during COVID in Australia, where people wanted to be in country towns and sometimes took COVID with them to those country towns. But the next step after that, of course, is that people might then become wedded to their district and want to start growing food. But as I said, this farm is a political protest, but we're bringing in young Aboriginal people all the time, and part of the proceeds from one of the products that we make goes to support Aboriginal students who are in financial difficulties, and there's a lot of them, obviously. But we want to promote this idea that young Aboriginal people can make a living off the land, and that it is their right to do so. But so many of the non-Aboriginal people who come here, that's what they want to do. They want to live a better life. They want to eat better food. They want to work for their food. And so we see a lot of people like that coming to the farm, and a lot of Aboriginal people, the one thing they don't have is land. So we're hoping that we can use the farm as a lever to get land back off government. You know, what they call wasteland, you know, degraded farms, old degraded railway sidings where there's no train anymore, all of those things, and so that young people can return to the land and create communities again. Country sporting teams can't field football teams and cricket teams because there's no young people left. So we want to reverse that, but I think there's a lot of will for it to happen in Australia. But our major aim is to make sure that Aboriginal people are part of it. Aboriginal people are part of the economy, and Aboriginal people have land. We have the old land back. It's not easy.
Right.
There's a hell of a kickback, resistance to that idea, but that's why we have young people, because the fight may go for 400 years. So you need new soldiers. I don't like talking in terms of war, you know. I'm really against it. My culture is against it. But we need to replenish ourselves with inspiration and zeal and young bodies, because farm's hard work.
Super. Well, thank you very much for that. I think we have run out of time, unfortunately. It's been really wonderful having this opportunity to talk to the three of you. Before I do thank you each and move on, I'd like to just quickly mention that after this session, the next session is called Real Time. And speaking of younger people, we have the artist and environmental engineer Tiga Brain joining us from New York. She's Australian-born, based in New York, and she will be up next in a session called Real Time. But for the moment, it's difficult to do this because, of course, we don't have an audience with hands at the ready, so I'm going to do it for them. I'd like to thank Timothy Morton, Lynn Rees, and, of course, Bruce Pascoe. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.